The night it started, the city was drowning in rain, and I told myself it was only a meeting. Just work, just business, just harmless. But the truth is, even then, I knew something in me was already shifting, quietly, like a door unlocking from the inside. I didn't plan to fall for my husband's best friend. Nobody plans to destroy their own home. It happens one decision at a time, one heartbeat too long, one look that lingers until it becomes something you can't take back. If stories like this remind you how fragile trust can be, how easily love can turn into something unrecognizable, then stay. Subscribe, listen, and remember. Sometimes the quietest confessions are the ones that change everything. It started so simply that I almost missed the moment everything changed. I still remember the sound of the rain against the office windows that night, the low hum of the city below, the faint smell of burnt coffee lingering long after everyone else had gone home. Daniel sat across from me, his sleeves rolled up, the glow of his monitor flickering against the sharp lines of his face. We were the last two left again. I told myself it was just dedication, just work ethic. But even then, something in the silence between us felt too full. He wasn't supposed to matter to me like that. He was my husband's best friend, the man who stood beside him at our wedding, who toasted to our love, who once helped us move into our first apartment. I'd known him for years, but never like this. Back then, I thought intimacy came from touch. I didn't realize it could bloom from words, the kind whispered between long hours and dim lights, between exhaustion and laughter that feels too honest. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked that night, not looking up from his screen. "Regret what?" I asked, pretending to type. "Choosing comfort over chaos," he said, his voice low, distant. The question lodged itself somewhere deep inside me. I told him no, of course not. I had a good life, a loving husband, stability, everything I thought I wanted. But later, driving home in the rain, his words echoed louder than the storm. I caught my reflection in the windshield, eyes tired, smile faint, like someone I used to know. My husband, Ethan, was still awake when I got home. He was on a call, headset on, pacing the living room. He gave me that half smile that people give when they're still halfway somewhere else. I kissed his shoulder, told him I was heading to bed. He nodded but didn't look up. I remember lying in the dark that night, listening to the faint murmur of his voice through the wall, and wondering when I'd stopped being the person he called between meetings. The next morning, Daniel sent me a message, "Coffee before work?" I stared at it for too long before replying, "Sure, just coffee." Just two colleagues who happened to share the same exhaustion. But when I met him at that small cafe near the office, the air already felt different. He made me laugh in a way that loosened something inside me. When his hand brushed mine as he passed me the sugar, it was like striking a match in a room soaked in gasoline. I spent the rest of that day pretending not to feel it. That quiet pull, that dangerous familiarity. Every time I glanced up from my desk, I found him watching me with that unreadable calm, like he was trying not to want what he already did. And maybe I was doing the same. Weeks passed like that. Long days, longer nights, boundaries dissolving one conversation at a time. We talked about everything. Childhood dreams, broken trust, the strange loneliness that creeps in even when you're not alone. He told me about his failed engagement, how he still couldn't delete her number. I told him about the silence in my marriage, how it wasn't loud enough to leave but too heavy to live with. We were both confessing to something without ever saying what it was. One evening, after another late meeting, the elevator broke down. Just us, four walls, and the hum of fluorescent light. The silence was unbearable. He leaned back against the wall, eyes closed, breathing steady. I could hear my own heartbeat. Then he said quietly, "You deserve more than being a ghost in your own life." I don't remember answering. I remember the way he looked at me, like he already knew every lie I'd told myself to stay faithful. The air between us tightened, and for a second I thought he'd kiss me. He didn't. The elevator jolted back to life, and when the doors opened, we both stepped out without a word. But that was the moment I stopped pretending I didn't want him. At home, Ethan was asleep on the couch, laptop open beside him. The glow of the screen reflected the half-written email he'd never finish. I stood there for a long time, watching him, realizing how far apart we'd drifted without even noticing. I wanted to wake him, to tell him everything I hadn't said in months, that I missed him, that I was scared of the distance growing between us. But I didn't. I just turned off the light and went to bed, leaving the room as quiet as my guilt. That night, I dreamed of rain again, of standing outside the office, watching it pour while Daniel held an umbrella over me. I couldn't see his face, only the reflection of light in the puddles, the echo of his voice saying my name. When I woke up, I couldn't remember the dream entirely, only the feeling it left behind, the certainty that something had already begun, and I was powerless to stop it. By the next week, I found myself looking forward to work more than home, to the coffee breaks, the stolen glances, the sound of his laughter that filled the space where love used to live. I told myself it was harmless, that I was in control. But control isn't real. It's the story we tell ourselves before the fall. And as winter deepened, I realized that every boundary I'd drawn had already been erased. Not with touch, not yet, but with something far more dangerous: understanding. Because sometimes the most intimate thing you can do with someone isn't touching them. It's letting them see you. The phone buzzed just before midnight, its light too bright in the darkness of the guest house corridor. I thought I was alone there, but I wasn't. I sat on the edge of the bed, heart pounding in rhythm with the ancient clock in the lobby, the kind of clock whose tick seems louder when the mind is awake and secret things are near. The message from Daniel arrived. I'll wait. Nothing more. I felt the weight of it in the dim glow of the screen. I didn't reply. I should have. Instead, I stepped into the corridor, my heels echoing on the tile floor, the air outside damp with early spring rain. My breath caught in the chill. I told myself I was only going to meet a friend. I told myself I was safe. But I knew I was already crossing. When I turned the corner toward his room, I saw the door ajar. A light spilled out into the hallway, yellow, quiet. He stood there, hand on the wood, eyes searching mine. I smelled his cologne mixed with the scent of rain on concrete. He didn't say anything. I didn't either. The world contracted until only we existed. That small liminal space where the world of men and women, of friendships and marriages dissolves into something else. The door closed behind us and I leaned against it, listening to my heartbeat, to his steady inhale, to the unknown creaking in our silence. He took my hand then, not aggressively, not unfamiliar, but gently, as though he was asking permission and already knew the answer. My fingers trembled. I wasn't a visitor anymore. I was an intruder. I wondered if he saw it, which side of the line I was on. He led me inside, and I watched the shadows move as the blinds fluttered with gusts of wind, the pattern on the carpet shifting like waves. He turned on the bedside lamp and the room filled with golden light flickering against our two silhouettes. I told myself I'd never do this again. Then I made a promise I didn't believe. We sat on the edge of the bed, side by side, but separated by more than space. The silence weighed heavier than any words. He leaned toward me, voice just above a whisper. You look beautiful tonight. My breath stalled. I wanted to laugh or cry or run, but none of those seemed possible. So I let the stillness hold me. The lamp buzzed softly, and outside the window the rain pounded the awning like a drum. I wanted nothing else in that moment but to stay there, to let the world stop until we both woke up and denied it all. Instead, he touched my hair, the tip of his finger tracing a line I have never forgotten, along the outer rim of my ear, down to my collarbone. I felt something break inside me, a fracture so fine I didn't believe it until the next day. The next morning, I walked into the office as though nothing had changed. I sipped coffee at my desk and kept my gaze on the screen, but the taste was bitter. Every time Daniel passed me a folder, his hand brushed mine. Every time he laughed at a joke I made, I noticed how his eyes stayed on my mouth. At home, I held my husband's hand during dinner and felt no heat. I realized then that I had stopped touching him. Or I had stopped feeling it when I did. The gap between us felt like a canyon. I didn't tell him. I didn't tell anyone. I carried on. Because to admit is to unravel. That evening, we arranged to meet again. He picked the quiet diner 2 blocks away so no one would see. We slipped into the booth, the neon sign outside painting the vinyl seats pink and blue. I looked at him over the top of my glass. He looked worn, older, quieter. He asked me about my weekend. I answered vaguely. I asked him about his latest date. He said he canceled it. He said that evening he felt empty. I nodded. Without knowing how, we were confessing our loneliness to one another with nothing said. He reached across the table, his fingers resting near mine. "I've been trying to ignore this," he said, his voice even but broken. "My guilt is sharp." I swallowed hard. I wasn't innocent either. "Why are you here with me?" I asked quietly. He looked at me long enough for my heart to clench. "Because you're the only one I stopped missing." The words hovered in the smoky air above us. I didn't answer. I didn't turn away. The diner's door chimed behind someone leaving. I glanced at the window and saw my reflection blurred by light and rain. A silhouette I didn't recognize. The affair began in fragments. Kisses stolen in parking lots. Fingers laced on long bus rides. Whispering names that weren't ours. But the real betrayal was not in the act. It was in the moment I believed the lie that I deserved this. That I could reclaim something I'd lost without paying the price. The real betrayal was convincing myself I was worthy of this kind of feeling, even when it meant hurting the ones I loved. At home, I composed texts to my husband that I would never send. "I'm sorry for not being you. I don't know who I am anymore." I drafted them in the Notes app, reread, deleted. I stared at them and deleted them again. Silence filled the gaps I'd left. Late at night, I lay awake, listening to the hum of the air conditioner, the soft crack of the wood as the floorboards adjusted to the darkness, my husband's breathing even upstairs. And I wondered how many nights had already passed without us meeting in the same space. I wondered when his warmth turned familiar and distant. I wondered when I started meeting someone who felt like danger and truth wrapped in one. I told myself I'd stop. I said it when he touched me. I said it when I looked at his eyes and saw mine back. But I didn't. Instead, the guilt came, sharp as broken glass in my chest, loud in the nights of my own making. I wrapped myself in false promises, in silent tears, in the kind of regret that doesn't shout, but weighs. And still, I went back. The last time we met, the hotel room smelled like stale cigarettes and too much perfume. He visited me instead of me going to him. I was nervous, raw, aware of every breath. He knocked softly. I opened the door, and the hallway light cast his shadow long and black across the wall. He stood there, suitcase in hand, his face a map of all we had learned. Longing, guilt, confusion, love. "I don't want this," he said, voice breaking. "But I don't know how to stop." I stepped aside and he entered, closing the door behind him. The lock clicked. We didn't talk about the future. We only stayed until dawn. We lay facing opposite directions in the same bed, the distance between us not measured in inches, but in what we hadn't said. The first light found us tangled in sheets and regret. I watched him sleep and I wanted to whisper goodbye. But again I couldn't. The morning came, and with it, clarity. When I walked out into the sunlight, I felt too heavy to breathe. I didn't look back. And when I did, the corridor behind me held only shadows where we once laughed. I left with my heels clicking, my reflection in the glass door taller and narrower, shaped by what I had done. I carried the secret hours like a wound, open, raw, alive. And I knew I could never erase the weight of it. The message that ruined everything wasn't long. It was a sentence. 8 words, typed too fast, sent to the wrong name. I remember the sound of my phone buzzing across the kitchen counter, the way the sunlight hit the tiles that morning, the smell of burnt toast I never finished scraping. Ethan stood by the coffee maker, scrolling through his own phone, half listening as I told him about my schedule. Then his screen lit up. My name, my words, but not meant for him. Last night still feels like fire. I didn't notice at first. I was rinsing a mug, humming to fill the silence. The clatter of porcelain stopped when I saw his face, how it drained of color in slow motion. His eyes lifted to mine, empty, searching. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The world around us seemed to pause, the kettle's whistle fading, the clock ticking louder than breath. "Who's Daniel?" he finally asked. His voice was quiet, flat, like something fragile balancing on a ledge. My mouth opened, but no words came out. Every excuse I rehearsed in secret dissolved on my tongue. The truth hung in the air, naked, heavy, undeniable. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, though even as I said it, I knew it wasn't enough. Sorry was for accidents, for spilled coffee and missed birthdays. Not for this. He didn't answer. He just placed his phone on the counter, walked past me, and stood by the window. For a moment, I thought he might throw something, shout, demand answers. But what he did was worse. He went still. He folded his arms, looked out at the rain starting to fall, and asked quietly, "How long?" I told him the truth. Maybe I shouldn't have, but I did. I told him about the nights, the meetings, the lies. Each word felt like another nail sealing the coffin of our marriage. He didn't cry. He just nodded slowly, eyes fixed on nothing, as if memorizing the sound of my voice to know what to forget. When he finally turned toward me, his face was a mask of exhaustion, the kind that comes from loving someone who's already gone. "You should go," he said. No anger, just finality. I packed a bag in silence, listening to the rain drum against the windows. I wanted him to stop me. I wanted him to say something cruel. Anything to make me feel small enough to crawl back into his forgiveness. But he didn't. He just stood there, a man hollowed out by something he didn't deserve. That night I stayed at a hotel on the edge of the city, the same one Daniel and I had used before. But the room looked different now. The sheets colder, the mirror crueler. When Daniel arrived, his eyes were wide with panic. "He knows?" he whispered. I nodded. He sat on the bed, buried his face in his hands, and for the first time, I saw him break. "I'll talk to him," he said. "He won't listen," I replied. And we both knew it was true. The days that followed blurred together, messages from friends I didn't answer, calls I let ring. Ethan moved out of the house, taking nothing but his clothes and a box of photographs. I found one left behind, our wedding day, him lifting me in the air while sunlight caught my hair. I traced the edges of it until my fingers smudged the paper. That photograph used to mean everything. Now it felt like evidence. Daniel tried to comfort me, but guilt had stripped our connection of oxygen. We met once more at the river, where the water moved slow and gray beneath the bridge. "We can't keep doing this," he said, voice trembling. "There's nothing left to save." I wanted to tell him I loved him, but the word felt heavy, dishonest, poisoned by all it had cost. Instead, I just said, "I know." He reached out to touch my face, but I stepped back. Maybe it was shame. Maybe it was finally seeing clearly that what we called love was really escape. We stood there in the wind, the city noise distant, and neither of us spoke again. He turned away first. The sound of his footsteps fading over the bridge felt like the closing of a door I'd never reopen. I went home that night to an empty house. The silence was unbearable, not peaceful, but punishing. I sat on the floor back against the wall and cried until the sky outside turned pale. I thought about every decision that brought me here, every moment I could have stopped and didn't. And somewhere between exhaustion and regret, I realized that the worst part of betrayal isn't being caught. It's realizing that the person you betrayed the most was yourself. Days stretched into weeks. Ethan didn't call. Friends asked questions I couldn't answer. The bed felt too large, the house too quiet. I started talking to myself, narrating my mornings just to hear a voice in the air. Sometimes I'd imagine him walking through the door, forgiving me, saving me from the wreckage I built. But I knew better. There are some wounds that forgiveness can't touch. I deleted Daniel's #1 evening, but kept his last text. "Take care of yourself." It sat there like a ghost light, impossible to erase. And though I tried to convince myself it was closure, deep down, I knew it wasn't. It was just another echo, proof that silence can sound like punishment when you're the one who created it. Time doesn't heal. It erases in fragments, little by little, the sharp edges dull, not because they stop hurting, but because the body learns how to breathe around the wound. Months passed before I realized I'd stopped checking my phone every morning. The silence between me and Daniel became its own kind of language, one I could finally understand. There were no messages, no chance encounters, just the soft decay of something that had burned too brightly to last. I moved into a small apartment downtown. The walls were thin, the light too harsh, but it was mine. I filled it with noise to drown out memory, music, the hum of the refrigerator, the traffic outside. I worked longer hours, smiled at people who didn't know me, and tried to find meaning in routine. Yet sometimes, when I caught my reflection in the elevator mirror, I still saw the woman from before, the one who mistook longing for love, attention for redemption. She stared back at me, silent, almost forgiving. Ethan filed for divorce in the spring. We met once at the courthouse, the smell of old paper and disinfectant hanging in the air. He wore the same suit from our wedding day. I don't think he realized it. Or maybe he did. Maybe that was the cruel symmetry of it. We didn't speak much. Just signatures, brief nods, the quiet exchange of finality. When the clerk asked if we wanted copies, he said no. I did too. What was there to keep? Outside, the cherry trees were blooming. I watched petals fall onto the pavement, soft and bright against the gray. He paused beside me, hands in his pockets, eyes distant. "You could have told me," he said, voice trembling but calm. "I would have tried to fix it." I swallowed hard. "I didn't know how." He nodded like he expected that answer. Then softer. "I hope he was worth it." He walked away before I could respond. I wanted to tell him that no one ever is. Not when love dies this way, by slow neglect and quiet betrayal. But he didn't look back, and maybe that was mercy. Watching his figure fade into the blur of traffic, I realized that forgiveness doesn't always arrive wrapped in words. Sometimes it comes disguised as absence. Summer bled into autumn. The air grew colder, clearer. I started running in the mornings, just to feel the rhythm of my own breath again. Each stride felt like a sentence rewritten, each sunrise a chance to start over. I thought less of Daniel then, though he appeared sometimes in dreams. Faceless, voiceless, standing at the edge of something I could never cross again. I'd wake up with the taste of rain on my lips, heart racing, the ghost of what we were fading with daylight. Then one afternoon, months later, I saw him. It happened by accident, the way the past always does. I was crossing the street near the river when I caught sight of him leaning against a railing, watching the water. His hair was shorter, his posture heavier. He turned, and for a moment our eyes met. Neither of us smiled. Neither of us moved closer. It was as if time itself had stopped to let us acknowledge the ruin we'd made. The silence between us said everything words could not: apology, memory, surrender. I don't know who looked away first. When I finally walked on, my chest felt lighter, like something had finally exhaled after holding its breath too long. There was no closure, no cinematic ending, just two people carrying the weight of choices they couldn't undo. That night, back in my apartment, I lit a candle and opened the box of photographs I'd almost thrown away. There we were, me and Ethan, laughing beneath a sky of sparklers. Daniel in the background, hand raised mid-toast, smiling. I stared at that picture for a long time. I could see the moment before everything began, the innocence of it, the unbroken trust. I wanted to reach through the image and warn them all. But life doesn't offer rewinds, only echoes. I burned the photo slowly, watching the edges curl, the faces blur into ash. The smoke rose, thin and white, disappearing into the air like a prayer too late to matter. When it was done, I opened the window and let the wind carry it away. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the rain. It taps against the glass in the same rhythm it did that first night. Steady, relentless, unforgiving. And in that sound, I find something almost peaceful. Not absolution, Not even redemption. Just the truth that love once broken doesn't end. It lingers, in the pauses, in the spaces we leave behind, in the quiet hours when the heart forgets how to lie. I tell myself I've learned from it, that I'll never mistake desire for destiny again. But some nights, when the city is quiet and the world feels suspended, I catch myself glancing at the door, half expecting a knock, half fearing it. And that's how I know it's over. Because the only thing left between us now is silence, and maybe after everything, that's the only kind of peace I deserve.